I've been teaching quilt making for probably 35 years.
Okay.
I teach still at the Helderberg Workshop, even though I'm slightly retired.
That Linda O'Connor.
That's the one.
That's your
This will be what many of the members of the Voorheesville Village Quilters will remember. Linda O'Connor, the group founder and informal leader, standing at the head of the class, as she had done over a long career in teaching. She taught home economics, quilt making at the State Museum, at the Institute of History and Art, and at Guilderland and Voorheesville High Schools. Skills she learned from her mother and grandmother in Bartow, Florida.
I would spend, days on end out at the farm with she and my grandfather. And that's where I learned to sew. My mother was a crocheter, not that that means anything, but it's just that that wasn't something that I liked to do, so it was fun to be with my grandmother. And then later on, my mother taught me to sew on the sewing machine when I was about 8. And once I had a sewing machine, I had a sewing machine to use, I spent a lot of lovely happy hours sewing. And so quilting was just a natural.
Her family relationships were even echoed in some of her work.
She loved these old photographs of her family. And her parents lived until they were in their late 90s, and her grandparents lived until they were in their hundreds. And we used to see them quite often. And it was interesting, some of the stories that they told. And they were from the Midwest. She was originally from Indianapolis. And farm people.
Tom O'Connor now has the task of sorting through a lifetime of Linda's work and coming to terms with a productive and vital life so suddenly ended.
Well, it's hard to believe.
It definitely is, I know.
Come and look at the studio.
Okay.
You'll get a kick out of this.
Linda's Quilt Studio. It's a sure bet that serious quilters everywhere have a room like this, jammed packed with bolts, crates, machines, buttons, and ongoing projects.
At one time, quilting was a utilitarian type of occupation. In other words, you made quilts to use, to have for warmth and to take care of your family. And a lot of people were sewing, hand sewing and machine sewing, making these things so that people would stay warm. Well, then as time progressed and people got more interested in it, it became an art form.
Linda's unique quilting started as the familiar patterns of patches and squares of traditional works. But as she grew in skill and traveled, that all changed.
The more she saw, I think, the simpler, the more refined her ideas became, to the point where I think that these last things, things that she was working on that were really sort of where she was pushing the envelope a little bit with them, had a really nice quality to them. They were, she had a touch. She had a real touch.
And that means taking fabrics and cutting them up and making pictures and or special wild designs, and then painting and putting beads on the top and ribbons and lace and all kinds of funny things. So quilting has evolved from this side over here to over here.
Here's one of Linda's this side over here works. It's called Occupational Therapy, for reasons Tom doesn't quite know. They had a unique collaboration. She made the quilt, and he made an art print out of it.
Color. I would print the black and whites, and then she would hand color the orange and the yellow in.
You were quite a pair, working together.
Yeah, we had a lot of kind of crazy things going on, but I could never keep up with her. She was way ahead of me in terms of, how busy she was in that.
Yes, she had a lot of energy. And Linda's busyness carried over into her active friendships.
I see Linda as being multifaceted because she had friends in so many different areas. She was one of those people that had a very quiet, unassuming voice, and yet she roared because she just loved the fact that women had power in the world. And that's what I remember most about Linda.
Jackie Perry met Linda in 1978. They were neighbors and traveled frequently to quilting events like this one in Lancaster, Pennsylvania in 1994.
She gave me this bracelet, or she didn't give it to me. She showed me how to make this bracelet recently. I admired it on her, the one with the little buttons. And so she very briefly told me how to do it and how to put it together. It was a little more tedious than I thought, but it really came out pretty good. She was always right there with whatever you asked her to make or to show you how to make. She would be right there to show you. But I will miss her.
Linda's talents also included things you could wear.
She also, for a long time, made little kitties' clothes. Wow. That were quilted.
And somewhere in the twilight zone between quilts and clothing, Linda picked up a thing about buttons.
And Linda
She was big on buttons.
Yeah, I have found sacks of buttons, 200. There's probably 10,000 buttons in this house. I mean, it's the craziest thing, you know. And she would get buttons from all over. People would bring her sacks of buttons because she loved them.
If I had to count all the buttons that I have, I don't know if I could do it. I could do it if I had to, but thousands. I have thousands of buttons. And the thing with a collection, when you get older, if somebody asks you, do you collect something or do you want so-and-so, and you say, oh yeah, I collect buttons, then everybody you've ever known comes out of the woodwork to give you some buttons. So that's where I have them. I'm actually just holding on to a lot of them for other people, really, because I don't know what I'm going to do with them all.
Linda had no trouble giving away good advice and encouragement. Julianne Fortran, who met her in 1989, took a class from Linda in 2000 and was urged to push the envelope.
Finally showed something that I thought that I could do. And this was very simply a 4-patch that Linda said, take a square and put it on top of the 4-patch at an angle, cut it out, and see what you get. And this is what I got. I made this from my stash. And my husband's reaction to it, since I would characterize myself as a traditional quilter, was, she ruined you, but she didn't.
I'll show you the last thing.
Here in Linda's still untouched quilt
was
studio
another-
are some just completed
Yeah,
projects.
scarves. You know, she was into these scarves.
But this is so different from that other one
Yeah.
because you can't see through it.
Right.
And so what was she using, wool?
I'm not sure. I guess it's all wool.
And a project or two that weren't yet finished.
And then this would be a jacket.
Mm.
I think this one
on both
was.
sides.
No,
Yes.
it's done on something about the sleeves or the sides that she would change.
One thing Linda did accomplish before her passing was teaching the next generation her skills. Judy Schettelbauer's daughter learned sewing from Linda at Helderberg Workshop, not necessarily from her own mom.
My daughter broke my bubble by telling me that it was really Linda who taught me to sew, Mom, not you. And it was because of the Helderberg Workshop. They made teddy bears at the workshop, and apparently they were finished making the teddy bears and still had a day or two left. So they made these little pin cushions, and Jess said, Mom, that pin cushion was the first thing I sewed, and Linda taught me how to do it. So there's that story.
Edie Martin, who met Linda in 1976 and attended her classes, got one simple bit of advice about quilting.
Well, she always said, and probably has told everyone, that if you don't know what color to choose green to blend in with any other color you have, and it always works. I've always done that. And I didn't like green. Green was not one of my favorite colors. But yeah, it always worked. She taught me everything I know about quilting.
She was everybody's big sister. She was a big sister in her family, and it just kind of carried into everything else. And she had many, 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 many interests. And when she found one, she was so happy to look it up and find out how to do it and teach somebody. And so she had many classes, and she led our quilt group all these years.
she was always so happy to see you. Every time she'd walk in the library, it was, oh, I'm so glad to see you. I needed to talk to you about this. I wanted to ask you about this. And just always made you feel wanted and needed, and it was just wonderful.
Linda was our leader, and she would always come with magazines and things she was fooling around with making, and just inspire us all.
Back in 2008, Linda O'Connor talked about Linda Cronell's grandmother, 98-year-old Betty Smith.
Well, Betty is the sort of person that we all look up to. She is a wonderful example to all of us for her life, what she's done and how she's done it. And I think we all feel, really, really happy to know her and, just be part of what she is.
Were it not for her quiet modesty, Linda could have been talking about herself. In an earlier chat, Linda foresaw the day when her husband Tom and her sons Sean and Ian would have the job of figuring out what to do with all this.
Now, the other day at Christmas, I'm trying to show my children, who were both at my house that day, some of the things I have lying around that I don't want to be thrown out just by accident if I go first.
Including a box of tools and a blowtorch patented in 1822, left to her by her grandfather.
Plus a lot of other things in this box. Well, my boys were like, oh, Mom, where'd you get this? And why have you been hiding it? I haven't been hiding it. It's so heavy I couldn't get it off the shelf, so I just left it up there.
And not too long ago, Linda had a conversation with good friend, funeral director Herb Riley, about spaces in the Mount Pleasant Cemetery.
I think that he had said to her, look, there's fewer and fewer plots left because the place is going to be filled up pretty soon, and there's no more space. So she bought this plot and gave it to me for Christmas, and it was a howling when we talked about presents on Christmas morning. Oh my God, the boys went berserk. They were laughing, and it was, man, you got nerve to give him a cemetery plot. You sort of giggle to yourself because it was such a crazy Christmas present.
No matter how complicated and intricate the work got, it was always about others.
And in the I call it the olden days, but way back, what happened was they called it a quilting bee. When women would get together around a quilt frame, and there'd be 5 or 6 people on one side and 5 or 6 on the other, and everybody's quilting away, but talking and sharing what happened in your family, who's got what disease, who died, who's living, who moved. All the things that women were dying to talk about. They wanted to get together. They wanted to be together. And so this quilting bee that they had that's what it was. It was really a social event.
Quilting will never be the same in Voorheesville without Linda.
And there was never any downtime in this house. It was always going.
My first thought was, God must have needed a quilt. And Linda's up there now to help to make him one.